The sky above Draction 4 was always gray. Thick clouds hovered over the sharp mountain ridges, casting shadows on the small alien settlement below. Among those shadows stood a girl, tall, slender, with silver skin and violet eyes. Her name was Rilla, and everyone knew her, not for honor or bravery, but for something far worse in their eyes. She was infertile on her planet. Females were judged by their ability to produce heirs. Warriors, scientists, leaders, none of it mattered if you could not create life. It was a cruel tradition, one passed down for generations. Rilla had failed the fertility trial 3 times. That was enough for them to call her useless. Morning, when she walked to the market, eyes followed her. Some with pity, most with mockery. Children were told not to speak to her. Males turned their backs, and the elder women whispered curses behind closed doors. Today was no different, as Rilla stepped onto the stone path. A group of young males passed by. One of them smirked and called out, "Why don't you ask the stars for a baby, broken one?" The others laughed, loud and cruel. Rilla didn't reply. She had learned long ago that silence was her shield. She kept walking, her head high even. If her heart felt like it was falling apart, she reached the food stall and quietly picked up a packet of dried root cakes. The merchant barely looked at her, just pointed to the price with a grunt. No words, no smile. As she turned to leave, a loud boom shook the ground. Everyone around her froze. Another explosion followed, closer this time. People ran out of there. Homes, the skies were no longer gray. They were red, filled with fire and smoke. Then came the sound none of them expected, a human ship descending. It crashed beyond the eastern ridge, smoke trailing behind it. For a moment, there was silence, then chaos. Warriors gathered their weapons, drones flew toward the wreck. Fear spread like fire. Rilla stood still. She had read about humans and their history. Decks wild, dangerous, emotional, some called them. Brave, others called them beasts. But something inside her stirred, not fear, not hate, but curiosity. A few hours passed, and the wreck site was secured. The humans had survived. A temporary base was set up near the edge of the village. Rilla didn't approach. She watched from the distance like everyone else. Soldiers in dark suits moved fast. Machines hovered. Orders were shouted through translators. And then he appeared tall. Strong shoulders, dark skin, brown eyes that scanned the area sharply. He looked like a leader, but the others didn't follow him. He followed them. His gaze wandered and landed on her. Rilla didn't move. Neither did he. Seconds passed. Long, strange seconds. Then he tilted his head slightly, as if he recognized something not in her face, but in her silence, in her loneliness. She turned and walked away quickly, her heart beating faster than it had in years. That night, Rilla sat on the roof of her stone hut. She looked up at the stars, wondering what the human had seen in her. Was it pity? Was it curiosity? Or was it nothing at all? The wind carried voices from the village center. More laughter, more gossip. Did you see her looking at the humans? She'll sleep with one just to feel wanted. She should be exiled before she shames us all. Rilla closed her eyes. She didn't cry. Her tears had dried long ago, but the ache inside her chest never left. No matter how strong she acted, no matter how silent she stayed, the truth remained. She was alone. They would never let her forget it. The next morning, the humans were allowed limited access to the marketplace. As Rilla stepped outside, she noticed a few soldiers already there, scanning, observing, keeping distance. And then she saw him again, the same soldier from before. He was standing near the well, watching the locals argue over water rations. His eyes moved slowly until they found hers again. This time she didn't turn away. She walked past him, straight-backed, proud, trying not to show fear. But as she passed, something surprising happened. He spoke. "Are you okay?" The words were soft. The translator buzzed slightly, repeating them in her language. Rilla stopped. No one had asked her that in years. Maybe ever. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing, just stared. The human didn't look away. He didn't laugh, didn't pitied. He simply nodded and said, "You don't look broken to me." And then he walked off, leaving her standing there, stunned, confused, and for the first time in her life, hopeful. The village square was quieter than usual after the crash. Most locals kept their distance from the humans, whispering behind doors, watching from behind curtains. But Rila stood under the pale blue sun, motionless, her heart still echoing with the words the soldier had spoken the day before. "You don't look broken to me." No one had said anything like that to her, not in her entire life. On Draction 4, even a kind word had conditions, and Rilla had never qualified. She saw him. Again that morning, he stood near a trade stall, speaking through a translator drone. The merchant was tense, but the human wasn't angry. He was calm, curious, asking questions about their fruit, their tools, even their soil. Like he wanted to understand, not conquer. Rilla watched from a shaded corner, pretending to examine plants. But her eyes kept drifting back to him. His name, she later heard, was Corin Dale, Earth Forces Recon Sergeant, assigned to protect the crash zone until reinforcements arrived. No rank in her world meant anything to her, but the way he looked at everything with quiet intensity, it made her wonder. Why had he looked at her like that? That night, the winds howled harder than usual. Storms rolled down from the mountains. Rila's hut, like most of the lower houses, shook against the force. She placed rocks at the base of her door to keep the cold from seeping in. Then came a knock. She didn't move. Another knock, Firmer. When she opened the door, her eyes widened. Corin stood there, soaked from rain, holding a metal pack in one hand. "I brought food," he said. The translator glitched slightly but kept up. Rila blinked. "Why?" He shrugged, then smiled a little. "You looked like you needed some." She stepped aside. Corin entered without hesitation, his boots left. Water trails on her floor, but he didn't seem to care. He placed the pack on her table and opened it. Steam rose from warm packaged rations, human food, fragrant and rich. Rilla hadn't eaten anything warm in days. She hesitated, but her stomach didn't. She sat quietly across from him and began to eat. They didn't speak for a long time. Then Corin asked, "Why do they treat you like this?" Rilla froze. No one had ever asked. No one had ever cared. She placed the fork down. "I cannot give birth," she said. "That is all they see." Corin's expression didn't change. He simply nodded. "That's nonsense," he replied after. "A moment where I come from, that doesn't make you less, not even close." Rila looked down at her hands. They trembled slightly. "My mother cried when she found out," she whispered. "My father left. They say I bring shame. A woman to them." Corin leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "You are more a woman than half the people I've met in war zones. You're here, you've survived. That counts." Rila's heart pounded. She wanted to believe him, but belief was dangerous. It gave birth to hope, and hope had always betrayed her. As Corin stood to leave, she followed him to the door. He paused. "You should know something," he said. "She couldn't have children, either. But I loved her more than anything," Rilla asked. Softly, "Why?" Corin looked into her eyes, serious now. "Because she was enough, on her own." He stepped out into the storm and vanished into the rain. The next morning, the wind had settled, but the village had not. Word had spread. Rilla had let a human inside her home. That was all the villagers needed to label her as worse than broken traitor. Mothers pulled their children back when she walked by. One elder spat near her feet. Another whispered a curse loud enough for everyone to hear. Still, she didn't lower her head. She kept walking, and when she saw Corin again standing by the training field, speaking with an officer, she didn't look away this time. She walked straight to him, standing in front of the shocked soldiers. The villagers watched from a distance, expecting her to beg or cry. Instead, she spoke loud and clear. "Thank you for the food," she said. Corin smiled, not just with his mouth, but with his eyes. And then, right there in front of everyone, he did something no one expected. He reached out and touched her hand. Gasps filled the air. The translator drones picked up whispers, warnings, threats. A few alien males stepped forward, furious. Patrol drone buzzed higher in alarm, but Corin didn't move. Neither did Rilla. For a moment, the square fell silent, and in that silence, something changed. Not in the villagers. Not yet. But inside her, Rilla stood taller. The shame they had poured over her for years suddenly felt lighter. She turned, her fingers still holding his, and walked away with him, leaving a stunned crowd behind. The silence after Rilla walked away with the human didn't last long. By evening, the whispers had turned to fire. Her name was repeated across the village like a curse. Doors were slammed as she passed, not in fear and hatred. Not a soul offered her water or a glance. Even the wind carried insult. She took his hand. Someone spat. She dishonors her blood. Another hissed. She is not one of us anymore, said a voice from behind a curtain. But Rilla, for once, didn't care. Not today. She sat in the shade near the old stone well, her thoughts tangled. What scared her more than the voices was how much she wanted to believe Corin, that his touch had meant something real, that maybe she wasn't empty after all. Across the square, Corin stood alone beside a supply truck. His usual smile was missing. His commanding officer had spoken to him, sharp, cold, disapproving. "You're compromising interspecies diplomacy," the officer had warned. "We're here to recover tech, not start romance." Corin had replied with only one sentence. Respect doesn't need permission. But not everyone shared that view. That night, someone threw ashes at Rilla's door. The mark of exile. She stepped outside and looked down at it. Her hands didn't shake this time. She didn't clean it up either. Instead, she walked through the village as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. The next day, the alien elders summoned her, inside the high chamber of council judgment. The walls were cold and sharp like the voices that spoke within. "You've embarrassed our kind," one said. "Consorted with an outsider," another accused. "You stand before us like a bonded female, and yet no male here claims you. Why should we not cast you out?" Rilla did not kneel. She did not beg. She looked each one of them in the eye. "No male here ever saw me as worthy," she said, steady. "Until one who was not born among you did." Pause. A heavy, loaded silence. Then came the final voice, older, deeper, laced with centuries of pride and prejudice. "You are infertile. You are unclaimed. And now you are unclean." Rilla almost smiled. "Then let me be," she said. "I never asked to belong to your rules." They didn't argue. They didn't need to. They passed the sentence without a word, her name removed. From the family registry, her rights to housing revoked. She was now labeled Zarvan, which meant shadowed soul. A status worse than exile. It meant she didn't exist. Corin saw her standing alone near the supply gate later that day. He knew something had happened. Her shoulders were tense. Her face stood calm. "They erased you, didn't they?" he asked gently. Rilla nodded. "They said I have no name now." Corin exhaled and leaned against the wall beside her. "You want to leave this place?" She looked up at him. "I want to stop feeling like a problem." He nodded once. "Then come with me." Those words, soft and simple, hit harder than any speech. She wanted to say yes. Every bone in her body screamed for it. But something inside her resisted the fear of trading one cage for another. "I'm not yours," she said quietly. Corin didn't flinch. "You don't have to be mine. But I want to walk beside you if you'll let me." Her breath caught. In her world, males never asked. They took, they chose, they claimed. But Corin stood there, not demanding, not saving, just offering. That evening they walked side by side along the cliff edge. Below them, human engineers worked to lift pieces of their crashed ship. Drones buzzed in the fading light. "You humans," she said, breaking the silence. "Why do you always try to fix broken things? Corin looked out at the wreckage. Because we were broken once, and we decided never to stay that way. Rila closed her eyes, feeling the wind in her hair. The sky slowly shifting from purple to black. When I was young, she whispered, I believed I would lead warriors into battle. I trained harder than the others. I won matches against males twice my size. But when the blood test said I couldn't bear children, all of it disappeared, as if my strength meant nothing. Corin's voice was low. It didn't disappear. They just refused to see it. He turned to her then, reaching into his pocket. Rilla expected a gift, maybe food, or a token. But it was just his hand. Open. Empty. Waiting. Let me see the world with you, he said. She looked down at it, not sure whether to take it or run. Then she remembered the council chamber, mocking villagers, the nights of hunger and silence, and she remembered his eyes, never judging. Never afraid, so she placed her hand in his, and for the first time since her childhood, Rilla felt seen, not as an object, not as a mistake, but as someone who could still choose. By the next dawn, Rilla's name was everywhere, spoken in whispers, shouted in disgust, spat across the stone roads of the village. But not as a warrior, not as a leader. She was now the alien who held a human's hand. Children mimicked her. Behind their mothers, old warriors sharpened blades, cursing her as if she had drawn blood. Her face had become a symbol, not of shame for herself, but of fear for the others, because she had broken the one law that had never been written. Only understood do not mix with outsiders, and she had done it in front of everyone. Even worse, she had done it without regret. Rilla stood outside her hut, now stripped of the family banner. She no longer had a name in the records, but her image was carved into every conversation. She knew what was coming. Still, she didn't run. She wore her silence like armor, her pride like a sword. And Corin, the human soldier, didn't leave. Either the human camp had received reports from orbit, or had been complaints from the local council. A few voices even accused Corin of interfering with alien purity laws. Some on Earth demanded his suspension. His commanding officer handed him a datapad and said coldly, "End it. Walk away." Corin stared at the order, then dropped the pad on the table. "I won't apologize for seeing her as human," he said. The officer's voice grew sharper. "She's not human. She's not even your species. She's not your problem." Corin's reply was quiet and dangerous. "She's not a problem. She's the only reason I haven't given up on what we came here to protect." He left the tent without another word. That evening, Rilla was summoned again. Not by the council, but by the people. They formed a circle in the public square. Warriors, elders, traders, even children. The firelight made their faces look sharper, angrier, and standing at the center of it was a male warrior named Corvin, the one who had once tried to claim her as his bondmate before her infertility was discovered. He stepped forward now, puffed with pride, voice loud. "I challenge the human. Let him bleed for your disgrace." The crowd murmured approval. Rilla didn't blink. "I am not yours to defend or punish," she said calmly. "You were one of us," Corvin growled. "You were born here, trained here, given everything, and now you kneel to a foreign soldier." Rilla didn't flinch. "I never kneeled," she said. Behind her, Corin appeared unarmed. He had heard enough. He stepped between Rilla and Corvin, staring the taller alien in the eye. "You want to fight?" Corin asked, voice steady. "You won't win," Corvin laughed, drawing his blade. "I don't need to win. Just need to remind her what she is." But before he could strike, a blinding light filled the square. A translation drone hovered down, flashing red, a warning from the human camp. Then a voice echoed any act of violence against Earth's personnel will be considered a breach of treaty. The crowd stepped back and Rilla, without breaking eye contact, turned to Corvin. "I don't need a human to protect me," she said, her voice sharp. "But I'll walk beside anyone who sees me as more than a womb." Corin placed a hand on her shoulder, not to claim her, but to steady her. That small gesture, in front of the crowd, changed everything. Not for the village, but for her. Later that night, alone with Corin by the riverbank, she let herself breathe, for the first time. In days, the fear was quiet, the anger distant. She sat beside him, feet in the cool water. "I've never felt this hated before," she said softly. Corin glanced at her. "Then you've never made this many people afraid." She looked at him, confused. "They're not angry because you broke rules," he said. "They're angry because you showed them the rules are weak." Rilla's eyes narrowed. "And what happens when too many rules break?" Corin smiled. "Something new begins." The stars above flickered against the dark sky. The wrecked ship, still half buried in the valley, pulsed with blue repair lights, and Rilla sat there beside a human soldier, not claimed, not possessed, not saved, but seen. She no longer belonged to her world, and she wasn't yet part of his. But in that moment, she realized she didn't need to belong to anyone. She was building something different now. Not just for herself, but for all those like her. Forgotten, mislabeled, pushed aside. The only question left was, would the world let her? 2 days passed. 2 days since Rilla stood in front of her people and refused to kneel. 2 days since the human soldier placed a hand on her shoulder and made the entire village flinch. But what no one knew, not even Rilla, was what Corin had planned next. The morning air on Draction 4 was dry, heavy with tension. Human patrols had doubled. Alien eyes watched from rooftops and alleyways. Every whisper now carried her name and his, in the center of the human camp. Under a repaired canopy, Corin stood in front of a small gathering. Officers, diplomats, translators. His face was calm, but his voice carried weight. "I am requesting diplomatic approval," he said. "Not for a mission, not for strategy, for something personal." The officers glanced at each other. "You're serious?" one asked. Corin didn't blink. "Yes, I want to marry her." A silence thicker than smoke followed. Sergeant, his superior, said carefully, "She's not human. There are laws. Genetic barriers, political fallout." Corin cut him off. "Out! You think I care about blood? I'm not asking you to change a planet. It's just to respect a choice." The room shifted, uneasy. Surprised, then the approval came, quiet, reluctant, but stamped and signed. That evening, Rilla sat near the cliff again, watching clouds move like slow ships. Her fingers traced the edge of a polished stone. She didn't know why her heart felt so full and so uncertain. Then footsteps behind her. She turned. Corin stood there, breath steady, eyes focused. In his hand, not a ring, but a token. A small piece of alloy carved with her old family symbol, the one erased from the registry. "How did you?" she began. "I found it buried under the wreck," he said. "The symbol mattered, so I saved it." She stared at him, unsure what to say. Then he dropped to one knee, and every sound around her disappeared. "I don't care what they call you," Corin said. "I don't care about their laws or your blood or their hate. I just care about you, if you'll have me. Not as your rescuer, not your savior, but as your equal." His voice softened. "Will you marry me?" Rilla froze. The question hit harder than anything she had ever faced in training, in exile, in shame. She stepped back, eyes wide. "You would bond with me, knowing what I am." "I already know what you are," he said, rising slowly. "You're stronger than anyone I've met, and no test can measure that." She didn't answer. Not yet. She ran. Not out of fear, but because her whole life had been built around walls. Now someone was handing her the key. She didn't know how to open the door without shaking. The next morning, the village woke to the news the human soldier had proposed to the infertile girl. Shock turned to fury. The elders sent a message to the human base: reject the union, or leave our land. The response came swift and clear. Earth recognizes the bond. Interference will be considered aggression, for the first time. The Alien Council realized something terrifying. This girl they called useless now had the power to disrupt peace itself. And Rilla. She stood alone on the edge of the training field, watching young warriors spar once. She dreamed of fighting beside them, Now they looked at her like a ghost, untouchable, behind her footsteps again. She didn't need to turn. "Haven't answered," she said softly. "I know," Corin replied. "I've never been asked anything that mattered," she whispered. "And now you ask me the one thing I never believed I'd hear." He said nothing, just waited. Then she turned around. "If I say yes, I'm not just marrying you. I'm betraying my world." "No," Corin said. "You're choosing your own path. That's not betrayal, that's freedom."
Alice.
Her eyes burned. "Not with pain, with clarity. I'll marry you," she said, her voice steady, "but not to escape them. To prove I was never less."
Hey.
Corin reached for her hand again. Not to hold her back, but to walk beside her, wherever she decided to go. And this time, she took it without hesitation. By nightfall, word had spread across systems. A human soldier had proposed to an infertile alien female once branded worthless. She had said yes. The galaxy didn't know what to do with that. Some called it weakness, others, diplomacy. But for Rila, it wasn't about titles or planets. It was about finally being asked, finally being heard. The transport ship hummed quietly as it lifted from the surface of Draction 4, its engines glowing like soft fire in the evening sky. Rila didn't look back. Not once. She sat near the viewing window, her hand in Corin's eyes locked on the stars ahead, not because she was eager to reach Earth, but because behind her was nothing worth clinging to anymore. She had left her people, her home, her bloodline, but not her dignity. She had taken that back the moment. She said yes to the man beside her, not because he saved her, but because he believed her worth didn't need saving at all. They landed in orbit 3 days later. Earth's spaceport was bright, loud, alive with thousands of species and tongues. Rila stepped out in her dark blue robe, her posture straight, her eyes scanning the unknown like a trained warrior, not in fear, but readiness. A crowd had gathered. News of her marriage to a human soldier had spread far across systems. Some cheered, others just stared, but no one threw curses. No one spat at her feet. It was the first time she had walked in a crowd, without being treated like a shadow. Corin guided her gently through the maze of officials and gates. She stumbled on a moving walkway. He didn't laugh. He simply held, her elbow steady and quiet, like always. That night, he reached his home. Not a palace, not a command base, but a quiet hill cabin surrounded by trees. The sky above was clearer than anything Rila had ever seen. No smoke, no clouds. Just stars, wide and open, like the future she'd never dared to imagine. The next weeks moved like a dream. Rila learned to cook Earth food, poorly at first. She broke 2 pans. Burned rice. Over-seasoned soup. Corin didn't complain once. He just smiled and said, "We'll get better." Together they fixed furniture, planted wildflowers, and argued over which side of the bed was warmer. Rila had never argued about anything that didn't involve war or shame. Now she was fighting over blankets. Somehow it felt. Healing, she took classes through EarthNet, learning languages, science, history, and people welcomed her, not. All some sent messages filled with hate. Alien wife. Fertile or not, she's still not human. She's using him. Rila read them, then deleted them. Corin read them too, and quietly sent back one word, married. They even adopted a stray solar-furred pet called Aluma. It growled at night but curled up beside her by morning. It was the first living thing that trusted her without question. Still, not everything was perfect. Some nights she woke up breathless, heart racing, her mind back on Draction, back in the council hall, back where she was told she'd never be enough, and sometimes she believed it again. Until Corin reached out half asleep and said, "You're safe," like it was fact. Not comfort. Weeks turned into months. One morning Rila stepped outside into the garden. The air was cool, and the light rain brushed her face like a whisper. Then the message arrived. A buzzing device blinked red, a signal from a planetary health unit. Confused. Confused Rila tapped the screen. Confirmed. Pregnancy detected. Cross-species. Fusion successful. Further scans recommended. She froze. The world around her seemed to stop breathing. A child. That couldn't be. She had been tested more times than she could count. Her body had been labeled incapable, an empty vessel, a broken legacy. Her hands trembled. She walked inside, quiet, slow, holding the screen like it was, made of flame. Corin was brewing morning tea. She placed the message down in front of him. He read it once, then looked up. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She whispered, "I didn't think it was possible," and she added, almost afraid, "I don't know if I'm ready." Corin stepped forward, wrapping both arms around her. "We don't have to be ready today," he said. "We just have to walk together." And for the first time in her life, Rila wept. Not because she was scared, but because someone had given her the one thing her people had stolen, the chance to hope without shame. That night, she sat on the porch, hand resting over her stomach. Eyes fixed on the stars she once believed would never belong to her. Now they did. Not because of her womb, her blood, or her strength, but because she chose her own worth, and someone had stood beside her. Quietly when she did, and that had changed everything. The garden was quiet, except for the sound of wind brushing the leaves. Rilla sat with a warm cup in her hand, her other resting gently on her belly. The child growing inside her was still just a whisper, but it felt louder than any voice she'd ever heard. She had no name for it yet, only a feeling. The feeling that her story was not ending. It was beginning again. Corin walked out with the evening report. His face was unreadable. A message came through, he said. Rilla looked up. From Earth? He shook his head slowly. From Draction. Her body said. She hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in months, not since they left, not since the council branded her a shadow, erased her, called her unclean. Who? The new speaker of the High Circle. Young Corin said. She asked for you by name. Rila set her cup down carefully. I don't have a name there, she said. They took it. Not anymore, Corin replied. They restored it. Every file, every record. You're no longer Zarvan. Rila's throat tightened. Why? She asked. Why now? He handed her the second part of the message, a transmission scroll. The words were plain, without decoration. We were wrong. We saw a womb and ignored the warrior. Your strength changed more than you know. Come home not in chains, but as an example. Teach us what we forgot. She stared at the words until they blurred. I don't know if I can, she whispered. I don't know if I should. Corin didn't push her. You don't owe them anything, he said, but you owe yourself a choice. That night, sleep didn't come. She stepped outside and sat under the open sky, hands still resting on her stomach. The stars felt different now, closer, kinder. She remembered what it was like to be nothing, to be treated like an error, and she remembered how it felt when one person saw her differently, and everything began to change. Maybe it wasn't about going back to forgive. Maybe it was about going back to lead. 3 weeks later, a diplomatic vessel landed on Draction soil. No fanfare. No royal guards, just a simple ship, and a woman walking down the ramp in silver robes. Her belly showed now slight, but unmistakable. Gasps rose from the crowd. Children stared.
Ass.
Warriors lowered their eyes. Elders murmured, but none dared to speak first, until the new speaker stepped forward, the youngest council member in generations, and knelt. Rila, she said, voice steady, we welcome you home. Rila didn't respond immediately. She looked beyond the crowd, toward the training grounds, where young girls practiced with staffs, just like she once had. One of them turned, small, nervous, hopeful, and smiled at her. Rila took a deep breath. I'm not here to be welcomed, she said. I'm here to show you what welcome should look like. The speaker nodded slowly. Will you stay? No, Rila said. But I'll return, with my child, with truth. And if you're ready with lessons you should have learned long ago. There was no applause, just silence. But this time, it wasn't shame. It was respect. Back on Earth, Corin waited outside the station. When he saw her step out, still glowing from what she had done, he didn't speak. He just opened his arms, and she walked into them. I told them, she whispered, I would come back not to ask for my place, but to show them how to build a new one. He kissed her forehead gently. You've already built it. Months passed. The baby arrived in spring, strong, loud, curious. Not just a child, but a bridge between two worlds that once believed they would never cross. Rilla named her Salin, meaning born of two fires in her language. Her people sent gifts, hand-carved blades, ancient scrolls, protective charms, not out of guilt, but gratitude. They had started to change slowly, awkwardly, but truly. And it had all started with one woman who had nothing, no title, no family, no future, until a human wrapped her in his arms and saw everything. She still was, not broken, not barren. Brave Rilla stood one night, holding her daughter under the stars, watching lights from Earth and Draction blink in the sky together. She whispered to Salin, they mocked me once. They feared me. But you, little fire, will walk in places I wasn't allowed to stand. And behind her, Corin whispered back, she walked because you cleared the path. And so the stars listened to a love not born of duty or design, but choice. A love that taught galaxies what strength really meant.